I'm just checking that that's actually working. So it says it's coming on. Okay. So thank you all for coming out today for the OGP information sessions. This is the third one we've held. At Brisbane on Monday, Sydney yesterday, and we're going down to Melbourne tomorrow. So we're trying to get some good coverage in here. I'm Craig Tomler, and I'm facilitating these on behalf of the Prime Minister and Cabinet. And we also have Peter Moore from Prime Minister and Cabinet and Toby Bell down the back, who will be taking questions at the end. And we'll try and, we'll finish by 6:30. But if people want to ask questions after that, then at least one of us can be around to help answer questions. So, to start off, thank you all for coming out. Today's turned into a bit of a nasty day down here. So, numbers are down a little bit on the number of registrations we had. But I'm glad that the people who are here. I guess the scope is we're going to talk about some background on the Open Government Partnership, just to make sure everybody understands what it is and how it came about. We're going to talk about Australia's process for becoming a full member and some of the steps that have already been taken, how citizens and organisations can participate in this process. The OGP is very much about open government partnership, so it's very much about government working with civil societies. Then we'll have questions and answers, and then we'll finish off by giving you some resources that are out there for civil societies and individuals interested in the OGP process. So for starters, what is the OGP, the Open Government Partnership? So firstly, it's a voluntary body, and it's very much a multi-stakeholder international initiative. So it's not about just governments getting together and deciding to do this. It's very much a cooperative effort between governments and civil society. And in respect of that, the Global Steering Committee has 11 government representatives and 11 civil service representatives. So it's been structured in a way unlike most other international organisations. Now, the goals of the organisation is to secure concrete commitments from governments around open government, transparency, accountability, things around those sort of things. So it goes from everything from anti-corruption through to open data. And they're concrete commitments in that they have to be measurable and deliverable. And then there's a process in place to actually assess how governments actually deliver them and to actually ensure that commitments are met. So it's what it also is. It's an international forum where people in both in government and in civil society can actually communicate with their peers internationally and share information and experience and the initiatives they're doing. And it has become, I think, one of the most fertile grounds for sharing the sort of initiatives that are going on in different countries in this space. So there is quite a large community in place that Australia is now starting to be able to tap into. Also, as I said, the stakeholders are not just government, very much civil society have a very big stake in it as well. And there are some corporations and other organisations involved in the mix as well. So there are currently 69 members, including Australia. Now they're in different phases, and that's an important thing to think about. In that one of the main mechanisms in the OGP is a 2-year national action plan that's developed between governments and civil societies, and different countries are in different levels of plans, because some of them are still developing their plan, like Australia is. Some have done 1 plan, 2 plans, a few have done 3 plans, and each time the plans tackle new initiatives, they get more sophisticated. And one of the things that this process is very much about, it's not a once-off project where you basically do a plan, deliver it, and you're done. It's cyclical, where you say, okay, let's learn from what worked and what didn't work. Let's build on that and take it to the next level. So what we're seeing is that progressive plans become more sophisticated, more engaged, and they're basically, it's a process whereby governments and civil society and citizens are learning to work together more productively over time. So the first thing is the first plan most countries do is probably going to be the worst plan they ever do, even when they're very good, and they get better with iteration. So if there are only two things that you took away from all of that, the two things really I think that take away is that firstly, the OGP firstly is about open government, so building that transparency and accountability of government, and it's very much about partnerships. So it's not about government doing this alone, it's not about civil society doing this alone, it's about doing it in a cooperative and productive way. So to give you a bit of a timeline of how the OGP has come about and where it's up to. So originally they looked to found it back in August 2011. 8 countries came on board initially in September. Australia was a little bit slow to that. A couple of cohorts came in, so a lot of countries joined in 2012, and then there's been sort of a regular 8 to 10 joining each year. In 2013, former Australian government committed to joining the OGP. Shortly after that, we had an election. Other things got prioritised, and time went on. Russia was the only country that's withdrawn from the OGP, and that's been fairly significant because they've attracted a lot of international approbation because of that, and I think that was quite significant as well. The organisation actually is developing some ability to actually have not so much teeth as an ability to actually at least have countries actually take it very, very seriously in terms of that. So November this year, on the 24th, the new Prime Minister Turnbull wrote to the OGP and basically recommitted Australia to joining up as a member, and that initiated the current process. So that letter's up on the OGP AU website. That's also available from the OGP website. So I suppose one of the key things about this is it's not only there's been a recommitment by the Australian government, but the minister responsible is the Prime Minister. So it has a lot of weight and a lot of backing. And it's also been endorsed publicly through Cabinet. So it does have more backing than it's had at any point in Australian history. So it's a very good opportunity to move it forward. I'm now going to play you a couple of videos from a few of the international OGP folks. So this is Jack Mahoney. He's on the International Secretariat. He basically looks after the governments in the Asia Pacific region. So I'll just play this video quite quickly here.
Hello everyone. My name is Jack Mahoney and I'm a program officer at the OGP Support Unit, based in San Francisco and tasked primarily with supporting governments in the Asia Pacific region. Thank you for the opportunity to address the audience, and apologies for not being able to be there in person, especially as we're really excited about Australia joining the OGP family. Let me start by introducing OGP. OGP was launched in 2011 by 8 governments and 8 global civil society leaders as a partnership to improve government transparency, accountability, and responsiveness to citizens. OGP brings together government reformers from across government and civil society who recognize that their governments are much more likely to be effective and credible when they open their doors to public input and oversight. And that civil society should not just be critical voices on the outside, but can and should have an important role in crafting the policies that affect the everyday lives of citizens. So what does being an OGP participating country entail? By joining OGP, countries commit to developing a national action plan every 2 years with public consultation, assessing their own progress, as well as facilitating independent reporting on that progress. Countries also should plan on participating in a peer learning network that spans the globe. That's the very brief version, and I know that Pia and her team plan to run you through the rest of the details, and I encourage you to visit our website, opengovpartnerships.org. One thing to note is that OGP recognizes that all countries have different starting points and challenges, which also means that all countries, both developing and developed alike, can still improve from their status quo, be more ambitious, and demonstrate leadership on the diverse aspects of open government. So what does the picture look like globally? In the 4 years since its launch, OGP has come a very long way. We've grown from 8 to 69 countries today. We've delivered 109 action plans and over 2,500 commitments. 25% of those commitments have been recognized specifically for their ambition, completion, and relevance to the values of open government. Just a few examples I'd like to share with you. The United Kingdom has committed to creating a publicly accessible central registry of all company beneficial ownership information. Croatia has enacted rules that oblige government agencies and officials to consult the public on proposals on all draft regulations, and Indonesia has published spend data in elementary and junior high schools across 411 districts. There are many more examples for Australia to draw on, and we hope to eventually see some ambitious examples coming out of Australia that other governments can look at in the future. For both government and civil society, OGP is really a chance to work on innovative projects. In addition to the national dialogue, remember that OGP is a forum for countries to exchange ideas, and I'd encourage you to contact your colleagues in both government and civil society around the globe to share ideas and explore the possibility of shared commitments. In closing, I'm very excited for Australia to become a leader in OGP in the future. We hope that you've had a productive session today, and I look forward to seeing Australia's progress in the coming months. Thank you.
Okay, so sorry about that with the video. It has something to do with the display, which hopefully is all right now. This is Shreya. She's actually responsible for the civil society coordination within Asia Pacific. She's very, very approachable. You can access it through the OGP website. So if you have questions on the civil society side, she's an email away. I'll just play a short video from her as well.
Society coordinator for Asia Pacific. My role is to help CSOs understand the platform and support them in using it effectively. Like Jack, I'm thrilled to welcome Australia to the OGP community and look forward to working with you closely over the coming months. Jack's given you a global snapshot of the current state of the partnership. So let's look at the region. Asia Pacific as a region has been traditionally underrepresented within the partnership. Over Papua New Guinea, Sri Lanka, and of course Australia, all coming on board in recent months. That's slowly changing. Total number of participating countries now are 11, including amongst others, Mongolia, South Korea, New Zealand, and of course founding members, Philippines and Indonesia. And interest is building in countries like Nepal and Pakistan, certainly on the civil society side. So hopefully, we'll only see the base of OGP growth in this region in the coming months. Jack's given you a snapshot of some of the commitments that countries are making as part of their OGP action plans. So let me give you a few process examples. Georgia is one of the best processes and systems we've seen in place for government civil society cooperation. The two groups come together and work very closely in designing and monitoring the commitments, but also in co-governing OGP at the national level through regularly held forums that are co-led by both government and civil society. Such regular forums, in our experience, can be really important in building trust and getting the peak in OGP track. And many of the countries that tend to do well in OGP have such forums in place. The latest Philippines action plan is also worth mentioning, not just because many of its commitments are co-created, but also because it includes an element of co-implementation. So for example, while the government has committed to making information on its extractives industry available through regular EITI reports, civil society on its part has agreed to build the capacity of organizations to understand, analyze, and use this data and provide the necessary feedback. Coming to Australia, while the wait may have been long, we're certainly off to a good start. We've got the highest level of commitment from the Prime Minister of the cabinet, which can be really critical, but also used as an advocacy hook for those of you in civil society. We've got a good process and a good platform set up for online consultations, and further plans are underway from what I understand for outreach and dialogue both in the government and civil society side. And hopefully, information sessions like these will help bring more and more of you into these conversations. Let's not forget that Australia is already a leader in many areas of local government and has much to share with the region. But also, you have reformers within government, as well as an active and dynamic civil society that is ready and willing to partner with government in stretching ambition in other areas and making improvements where they will live. Does that mean that it's going to be easy or that success is guaranteed? Almost certainly not. OGP is ultimately about changing the culture of government, and that is a hard thing to do. It goes beyond passing laws and ticking boxes on guidance documents. It requires a government that is willing to listen, engage its citizens, be open to critique, but also active feedback. It requires a government that shares decision-making and power, so that citizens can trust their government. For civil society, it requires a shift too. It requires you to know when and how to switch from watchdog to being a constructive partner, to advocating from a place of moral high ground, to sometimes making ambitious compromises, recognizing that compromises made that are implemented can sometimes be better than ideas you made in just ideas. So for civil society, it's really important to coordinate, prioritize, and strategize against yourselves, and keep raising the bar as you do so. It's important also for both groups, government and civil society, to reach out to actors outside the usual suspects so the process can be truly inclusive. At the support unit, we have many resources to help both government and civil society as you move through this process. Guidance documents on crafting ambitious commitments, getting processes right and setting up regular multi-stakeholder forums, working groups to provide technical assistance and feedback on plans, and lots and lots of material on open government standards and best practices, and case studies and data drawn from OGP experiences across the network. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you need any help. We can share our contact details with you. I'll leave it at that, but good luck with the consultation and the development of the first action plan. We're really eagerly looking forward to it and stand ready to support you. Thank you so much for this opportunity and enjoy the rest of the session. Bye-bye.
So I guess that brings to what OGP membership actually involves. So participating countries must first have a high-level open government declaration, which is something Australia already has basically in place. They have to develop a 2-year national action plan involving public consultation, which is the process that Australia is going through at the moment. They have to then implement that plan over a 2-year period. And develop a self-assessment report, again with a minimum consultation period, and also commit to independent reporting on their progress going forward. So, in other words, they have to commit to very concrete and measurable actions that involve consultation with civil society, citizens, with other organisations and groups, and those get actually, I suppose, assessed at a regular basis to see whether they're actually being completed or not. And the OGP does have a process whereby it will name and shame countries where they're not actually meeting their requirements. So there's a couple actually listed on the website at the moment who have not been doing what they said they would do. So there is quite a process to make sure it's not just government saying, yes, we're going to do these things, and at the end of it saying, yeah, we reckon we've done them. There's actually independent assessment at the stages in the process to make it a more rigorous process of ensuring things get done. Now, looking at sort of the civil society side, how both organisations and individuals are involved, as I said, it brings together governments and civil society organisations in a almost equal relationship, where it tries to basically have them working together to come up with the actions. And as Shreya said, some of the actions may actually be in the National Action Plan may be delivered by civil society rather than by government. And those sort of things are possible. At an international level, they work very cooperatively, expected to work reasonably cooperatively at a national level, and countries are encouraged to put together a formalised mechanism for ongoing dialogue and collaboration. And those things normally emerge out of the first plan or the second plan as countries sort of work out and the organisations work out how they work together gainfully. We're in the process of doing that a little bit in Australia. There's been a group formed in the civil society sector called the Australian Open Government Partnership Network, which is basically a loose network of a number of different organisations like Transparency International, Open Australia Foundation, the Code for Australia, and various other groups. And that's really for information sharing and basically a group of organisations who are all in favour and supportive of open government. They're looking at working productively with government. And other organisations can form their own relationships or their own networks in the same way. There's nothing that basically limits the stakeholders in that. The OGP has a civil society coordination team which actually works specifically with civil societies to help them in their engagement with government and how to use that OGP mechanisms to actually achieve some of their advocacy goals. So the OGP actually has quite an active role in working with both governments and with civil society in basically ensuring the needs of both are actually met through the process. So now I'm going to give you a video from someone who's actually in the room. But we thought it better to play the video because that's the same video that people in other places are getting. So it means that you're getting the same consistent information. Now there are a few places where there are slight pauses in the video, which is just been it was a recording issue at the time. So we'll watch that one.
Hi, this is just a short video from me, Peter Wall from the Department of Prime Minister Communications about the OGP information session that we're running today. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I'm actually almost 8 months pregnant and I'm in flight. I will be joining the information session in Canberra, which will be live streamed as well. And I'll be joining you for questions in your information session a little bit later in the proceeding. So first of all, I just wanted to say that this is a really exciting time for all of us, whether you're in government, in civil society, in industry. This is a great opportunity to develop a path forward for open government in Australia. We do, of course, have a really proud and long history in open government in Australia, particularly when compared around the world, but there's always more to be done. So this is the first opportunity in history to actually come together as a whole community, as a whole society in Australia, and develop what that future vision should look like, and to develop the action plan for how we can do open government moving forward. So it's a very exciting time. I'm looking forward to working with all of you, and it's already been a pleasure to work with those who have contributed thus far to kick this off. The Prime Minister is actually the lead minister on this, and you can find his letter to the OGP support unit on the OGP website. We'll make sure that we add a link to that to the OGP Australia website very soon. But this has the support from the very highest thing. So OGP consultation in Australia was to design a process to develop a national action plan that was as open and inclusive and transparent as possible. So we've taken, I guess, best practice and taken the lessons learned from a lot of consultations in the past, and we wanted to start with a clean slate. We didn't want to take the traditional discussion paper approach, because we thought only and then publishing the best possible outcome for this consultation. So we started with a blank slate. We're asking for your feedback and input as we go through this 6-month process. And we're looking forward to seeing the variety of contributions and ideas that you have about both direct commitments that need to be made, as well as the other content that we need to go into the National Action Plan. The general structure for a National Action Plan has been largely defined by the Open Government Partnership, and there's information about that on the website. But what we've tried to do is to focus the main part of the consultation, which is stage 2, which launches today. Will launches this week, around that, what are those specific commitments that the Australian government could make about taking open government forward in Australia. So I'll talk through that in a second. We have also tried to design a process for this consultation that supports peer review. So this isn't just about contributing what you think, this is also about you commenting on other people's contributions. That peer review approach, we hope, will really help flush out what are high priorities for the community, what are really useful to the community, and what's really practical to implement. So the 2 workshops that we'll be running, the first one will be around brainstorming commitments, effectively, in stage 2, and then stage 3, the second workshop will be around brainstorming the implementation around commitments. We may even find that some commitments would be the sort of ones that are implemented by government, perhaps by civil industry. There's a lot of different opportunities about how this would work. So just briefly run through the process for the consultation. So stage 1 is obviously just a very short preparatory stage, really just to get people thinking about vision, about the skeleton document for the National Action Plan, which, as I said, is largely set by the OGP requirements. And what we ask is that people will contribute their feedbacks to the blog post comments, to the background page comments, by tweeting, and for people who are uncomfortable with online methods of engagement, they're very welcome to email us or to call us. But what we're trying to do is make sure that all contributions go up publicly as well. So please, if you contributing stuff to us directly, knew about information online, which we've necessary. Stage 2, which kicks off this week, 14th of December, is about fleshing out the skeleton document. So a wiki has gone up, and that wiki has the structure that we set out from stage 1 with your input, and it's really about you starting to add ideas. So there's more instructions in the wiki there, and I suggest that you actually also look at the blog. You can also add comments to the blog, tweets. We will be following throughout the entire consultation the Twitter hashtag #OGPAU to make sure that you tweet your thoughts there so that we can catch those over time. Stage 3 will be kicking off in March. In stage 2 there's also the live event which I spoke about. Stage 3 kicks off in March, and this stage is about voting for and commenting on specific comments to help identify your priorities or community priorities. But there'll also be a workshop to review the ideas, to co-design implementation options, and to look at ways you can actually measure and identify what success looks like for those commitments, which is really important. There's no point defining commitments if you can't define those commitments. So in order to a voting system, and looking forward to that live event. Stage 4 kicks off in May. We go through about a month, and that's the time for the government to consider the contributions made and to decide what's possible and practical to endorse. This is the same as the methodology of the Gov2O task force report consultation from 2008, which went quite well, and I commend that report and that process too, which is all available online. The idea is to try to have a finalised, co-developed and optimistic and wonderful National Action Plan finalised and ready to launch for July 2016. That will be then the first 2-year National Action Plan, and then every 2 years we have to redesign or redevelop a National Action Plan for Australia. Some countries are into their second and third National Action Plans now, but how those National Action Plans actually progress over years. So as Australia's first one, we anticipate this will be a really good step, but it's also worth everyone sort of keeping in mind that this is the first step on a longer journey. So we're quite excited about the opportunities, not just for this National Action Plan, but national action plans into the future, and more importantly, in establishing that relationship and communication framework with the broader civil society and industry to actually co-develop and co-design this approach moving forward. Please join the OGP AU mailing list. It's a really great way to keep up to date. We'll be making sure that any announcements go there, that every time the stage is updated goes there, that information is made available there as often as possible, and that will be a really useful way to keep up to date with what's going on over the next 6 months. So as mentioned at the beginning, I'm actually quite heavily pregnant at the moment, which is why I can't join today. Bill is physically, and I suggest you chat to him about your questions. There's also Craig Tomler, who very much helped us out with these information sessions. Thank you very much, Craig, and who's been involved in the community as well. We will be finalising who my replacement is as the lead coordinator for the Australian Government National Action Plan Development in the coming weeks, and we'll make sure that we introduce that person through the OGPAU website. So please, again, once you're on the mailing list, you'll be notified about who that person is in very short course. Meanwhile, the entire process has been designed to run regardless, and will, I'm very confident, yield some excellent results. We'll be publishing some frequently asked questions, so questions that come out of these information sessions, we will do our very best to answer and add to the website. So please feel free to ask questions, and anything we can't answer in the room will be taken on and trying to answer on the website for you. And I'd like to finish with a few thank yous. So first of all, to the various different activists and advocates who have engaged with us on this. Your support and feedback has been invaluable and very useful. So thank you very much, and we look forward to continuing to work with you all. The Accountability Roundtable, Transparency International, Peter Timmins, the Open Government Partnership Network that has been set up, which Craig will give you some more information about. And there's a lot of you that have sort of given feedback here or there, which has been very helpful. I'd like to give a big thank you to John McMillan for all the work he's done over the last 4 years around this space. I think he's been he and the Office of the Information Commissioner have been very helpful over a long time bringing this to fruition. And thank you all for coming along to these information sessions and for participating. It's also worth saying a big thank you to the Prime Minister for bringing us to this point where we can now finalise membership of the Open Government Partnership for Australia. So from here, I'll be joining you for live questions, hopefully pending, and looking forward to working with all of you online to develop this first Australian Government National Action Plan for the OGP. Thank you.
Okay, and kudos to Pia who sat through that entire thing without grimacing too much. It's always hard seeing a video a second time. So to reiterate the process that Australia is following, so we've completed the first stage, which was really just a preparatory sort of framework stage, but really it was about just getting the word out and starting getting people engaged. And there were a number of people who did get engaged at that stage, and things that have already started. So that's been gone reasonably well. We're now in stage 2, which is actually drafting the National Action Plan. That's happening on the wiki, which I'll give you the address to a little bit later. And there'll also be the event that Pierre talked about in February. That'll be live streamed, so people from around the country can participate in it. Stage 3 kicks off in March and goes until May, and that's when it's basically refining down the different actions that have been suggested to identify what are the priorities for the community, what's actually going to be the things that are actually put forward in the plan. Then in stage 4, the government will look at the actions that have been recommended and look at what's possible and practical for them to actually endorse. One of the key things to keep in mind is that this is an Australian government national action plan. So it's very much a national plan, so it's not binding on state, territory, local government. So I'm sure that we'll get actions through the process where people are asking for things that are in state or local government jurisdiction. Federal government can only commit to things that the federal government can commit to. So, and that will be the essence of the National Action Plan this time. The aim is then to launch it in July. And then there'll be an annual monitoring and reporting, and there'll be a task force that basically takes it forward and basically guides the implementation of the plan. So we now move on to the questions phase. So I don't know, Pia, you want to stay there or if you want to come up?
Yeah.
Either way. If you come up, you'll be on camera.
This is why I can't fly. See?
By 2 tickets.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so first question.
Because people are quite involved with local government and state governments, that's clearly a priority to somehow or other arrange for them to become part of this. Do you have any plan to get them as part of the process?
So, question for Cameron, or what was it?
It got most of it, but it's probably good to reiterate it.
So the question is what the plan is to get state, territory, local government engagement. In the very first instance, we're definitely reaching out and talking to them. We're looking at hopefully being able to showcase and get their contributions into this first National Action Plan. There are plenty of ways that the sub-national entities, so the state, territory, local governments can actually get involved in the OGP broader world in terms of the working groups that run, in terms of the international forums, in terms of the regional. There's a lot of sub-regional kind of working groups specifically for state, territory, local governments to actually work with state, territory, local government equivalents around the world. So we'll be encouraging that to happen. For our very first National Action Plan, to get something formally, generally speaking, a National Action Plan in Australia means something which is COAG approved. To get something COAG approved in 6 months, yeah, right? So what we're doing is the first National Action Plan is about federal government commitment, and fundamentally every National Action Plan around the world is fundamentally a federal government commitment in the first instance, and then you try to bring the others in as you go. So the idea is to use this process to develop those frameworks, to develop those relationships, to develop those, how we work together, and then to try to sort of start building that into the second National Action Plan is probably from a timing perspective, but also from a learning how to work together for this kind of framework perspective, the most appropriate way to go. But we are talking to them We do want to certainly showcase some of the great work that's happening, particularly in some of the state and territories. I mean, South Australia with the open government initiatives that they've been doing, New South Wales. There's a lot of great stuff out there we want to be able to showcase. And but if we sign something that tried to commit them in the first instance, with this short period of time, it would not go quite so well. So there is a plan. We think it's a good plan. We think it gets the balance right. And we'll be collaborating with them as much as possible to set that framework up moving forward.
To add a bit of breaking news to that, the OGP in the last couple of hours have announced that they will be running a pilot program for sub-regional governments. And they're inviting sub-regional governments of current participating countries and to submit an application to be one of 10 pilot sites to see how sub-regional government commitment to the OGP can work. The time frame for the pilot, I think submissions have to be in after we've called for commitments. So this process will have to run independently of any process that a sub-regional government wants to participate. The sub-regional governments don't have to get the regional coordinators' permission to do it, but I think not doing so wouldn't be a particularly positive move in the process. There's more information on the Open Government Partnership side. They broke it this afternoon. So the information, we will pass this information on to our state and territory counterparts, in that Craig and I have been speaking to them for the past couple of days. So we will keep them all in the loop with this process, and I can't see why we wouldn't support our state and territory colleagues should they so wish to go down this path. But our priority is a federal national action plan at this stage. And as I say, with the timing, it would be hard to manage both at the same time, and most likely the outcome of the applications for the pilot program wouldn't be determined until a point where our national action plan was actually being developed. So holding off on one for another it wouldn't benefit, I don't think.
We have momentum.
And the July timing is because of the OGP. So they like to run a July to June timeframe. So we could have run it earlier and had an even more tight timeline for this consultation, or we could have pushed out another 12 months, and I don't think anyone really wanted that. So we've tried to get the best of all worlds that we could. Cool, other questions? I love your bow tie.
Okay, I've spent a couple of years working, writing, and reading in this area. I've been rather disquieted to see the current statements by the Public Service Commissioner that FOI is quote unquote, it's pernicious, it's gone far too far, overall it's a bad thing. You were talking before about concrete achievements. Are we going to see a statement from the Prime Minister, a statement that I would hope will be embraced by John Lloyd, a statement that FOI is in fact a good thing, that the government will back off from some fairly inappropriate recommendations in the Hawke report, and indeed that the government will abandon its proposals to gut, indeed to abolish the Office of the Australian Information Commission.
Sure.
Talking about concrete proposals, what I've heard tonight is very nice, but I think civil society will be more trusting of what might otherwise be regarded as rhetoric if we actually see some commitments, some meaningful commitments on the part of the government, on the part of the Attorney General,
Sure.
And on the part of John Lloyd, who presumably does answer to the Prime Minister, and on the part of the Prime Minister as well.
Okay, so I'm going to answer that in a couple of parts. First of all, there have already been some suggestions around commitments for this process around the Information Commissioner, around FOI, around those kinds of things, and we recommend everything is on the table. Everyone add their specific commitments that you think that Australia should be undertaking as part of this National Action Plan. Everything will be going to the government, everything will be looked at, and everything will be answered. In terms of can I commit the Prime Minister to making a statement about all of the above? No, I cannot, because I'm standing here doing a consultation and I have to go and write, that would take a little more work than I can just promise you off the top of my head standing here right now.
That's a very public service answer.
Of course, but what would you expect me to be able to say?
What is the government's position?
The government's position is that they are undertaking a national action plan consultation to come up with the best possible things that Australia could do for an open government plan. So the specific things that you've suggested, several of which have already been suggested and have already been added to the wiki as firm commitments that the government should consider. Please add the rest of them as firm commitments the government should consider, and over the next 6 months we should be able to develop together a plan that actually deals with some of these things.
Yeah, if I can say something, coming from the civil society side, this is actually where the OGP offers a lot of opportunity, because it's not about simply holding government to account and basically saying, government, you need to show us that you're trustworthy, you need to show us you're doing these things. There's also the opportunity for civil society to step up and say, we want you to do these things. These are the actions we want you to take in the National Action Plan, and we will work with you to actually work out how they can be practically achieved. So at this point, there's a lot of work being done with civil societies to actually identify what are those specific actions that we want to put into the plan, that we are suggesting into the plan, not the government is suggesting, but the civil society is suggesting, to actually to see what the government then does with it. So this is the opportunity to get those things in.
And the commitment that we can make, hold on 1 second. The commitment I can make that has already been made is that the Cabinet have agreed to take every single thing that is recommended as a commitment and to assess them all. So there is a commitment to look at all of the recommendations and to then, agree with a plan moving forward. I'm afraid that's all we can do right now. We're in the process of developing this together.
I appreciate that, but you've also heard, for several years, you've heard civil society organisations, such as the Australian Privacy Foundation, making strong, cogent, repeated public statements about the Office of Information Commission.
Yes.
For example, we've had justices of the Supreme Court of Victoria saying that the gutting of FOI is inappropriate.
Yes.
Yes.
So these messages have gone out over a number of years.
Yes. And now we have a mechanism for actually putting them into actions for government to actually consider and then act on them, and for there to be an independent assessment of whether they're actually completed or not. What we didn't have in the past was that mechanism.
No.
Now we have that mechanism in place, and that is where the OGP is very, very powerful for civil society.
So either engage or don't, but I suggest engage.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi, firstly, a comment and then a question. The comment is, as a public servant who's done innumerable FOI requests, my general position on this is that if data or information can be obtained through an FOI request, it should be available to everyone. It should be open. That's my position on this both.
It is open.
As a person, as a public servant.
It is open on, if you go to Open Democracy and some other sites, you can actually file it through that site and it's available for everyone. It's just that if you file it anonymously, the ACT government, for example, doesn't like it. They'll give you a form, they want your name and address and other things.
But I'm saying that I don't want the FOI request to be made public. I want any piece of information that can be obtained through an FOI process to be available without going through the process.
It is
The second part of this, more of the question, is the role of the Privacy Commissioner and what steps you will be seeing or see need to be undertaken to rewrite the Privacy Act and to bring it up to date in order to manage access to more open data.
Okay, so on the first point about everything that is FOIable should just be open by default, I suggest making some specific commitment ideas or action ideas into the process would be useful. In a lot of cases, so I mean, data obviously is getting more and more open, but this is not just about data. This is much, much, much broader than that. But in a lot of cases, the things that are FOI are not by default published. So you look at some of the decisions, you look at things like cabinet papers, you look at, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I don't know how practical to say that everything should just be open, because I don't know what that includes, if you know what I mean. We'd always have to define that and work through that. But that's something to discuss, and that's certainly something to suggest. In the case of the second Privacy Act, there have been changes to the Privacy Act quite substantially in the last year or two. And my understanding is that it's actually improving public access to government information and data. My understanding is that the Privacy Commissioner has been very, very good to work with and very collaborative in trying to both maintain strong and secure and privacy, but also being able to facilitate secure access to things for appropriate research through appropriate mechanisms with appropriate legal constraints and those kinds of things. But there has been a lot of changes recently, and we know that because we've been analysing it for some of the other work that we do. So the Privacy Commissioner, in fact the Office of the Information Commissioner more broadly, have been very supportive and very engaged in this process. So any specific recommendations would be really good. But it has been recently reviewed, so it'd be interesting to hear what you think else needs to be reviewed in it or needs to be changed in it.
Yeah, and again, with submitting things through the wiki or through other channels, doesn't matter whether in civil society or a public servant, wherever it is, if you want to do it anonymously, you can. So there's the grounds to actually start submitting those things. And then people can comment and add to and build on, and the discussion can happen. And I think the big thing is to get these things on the table and get them to discuss, so we can start getting to points where actually say, well, this is solid on what actually needs to happen and how it needs to happen. And those are things that then become very, very, strong candidates to get considered in the plan.
For sure.
So why don't we just centralize the disclosures then?
Why don't we centralize disclosure? That's a great thing to suggest. There you go. Done.
Yep.
Next.
Okay.
Okay. This has got to be more.
Yes.
Of course. No.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I can appreciate that a lot of openness is about.
No. Okay. Let me.
So the question is, my specific question is, maybe can you give us some tangible examples of other things that potentially are on the table? I mean, you guys have been working on this for a while.
Yes.
You must have some ideas of the sorts of things
So many.
that possibly come out as initiatives.
Let me throw you some of my ideas. I mean, I've been thinking about this for 4 years, so and beyond. But certainly in the last 4 years since the OGP started, we've been following very closely. So if you look around the world, it's probably useful to draw on some of the examples around the world. So it's worth saying that a lot of governments, a lot of their commitments have been just bringing them up to what we have in Australia. Like a lot of countries don't have annual reports or budgets publicly published. I went to Mongolia recently. It was a fascinating contrast in how things are reported and how the parliamentary process works. In Australia, some of the thinking was around things like, having a single sort of register for FOI, a single FOI mechanism rather than having to go to individual agencies. There was some thinking about what if all of our legislative and parliamentary content was available programmatically. It was actually XML enabled, was actually, and I know I'm being a little bit geeky here, but that's my particular want. But if con law was actually a programmatically available thing, had an API, was XML enabled, you can start to build all kinds of applications and analysis and start to understand the impact of legislation on anything you want. Whereas right now, having to go in and look at actual documents can be very hard and very time consuming and not particularly useful from a rapid analysis sort of perspective.
You're still talking about technology.
No, that's because that's my particular thing.
Which is okay, because I like some of your ideas around that.
So let's get out of data sort of things entirely. If we look at, so around the world, some of the examples have been, setting up the task force idea of actually setting up a formal task force of civil society, industry and government participants to actually be part of the process of the implementation and development moving forward and oversight of the open government agenda. That for a lot of countries was in the first National Action Plan as a framework to then actually identify new opportunities for open government. So that's sort of, that's a very non-technical.
What I was thinking is, are you saying openness in terms of defining policy?
Yeah, yep.
That kind of stuff. So
yeah,
looking at the possibilities of, okay, before government says we're going to have this policy, we're going to have some discussions, we're going to put it together.
Yeah, that kind of stuff, absolutely.
That as well.
Absolutely.
And if you actually look out there, there's 109 plans that have been done. There's about 2,500 commitments. They are all indexed through the OGP website. You can actually use the Discovery Lab to look at what other countries are doing in this realm. And there's a whole range of things, ranging from very basic, like government will consult on policies, through to really, really sophisticated, like the UK, reporting on all beneficial ownership of corporations and things like that. So there's a range of things that are happening in that space. It's basically, I think, the openness space is very, very, very broad. It's very hard to sort of characterise into a basket. But one thing the OGP definitely is not, it is not solely focused on data as such.
Yeah.
It is focused on transparency, accountability, and equity. And it's the different things that can drive that in an openness process.
So in that context, data is a way of expressing.
It is. It is a tool. It's
Sometimes,
a tool of
yeah.
the process, but it's not always.
No, and we've tried to be fairly clear on the website that this is certainly not limited by data. The reason it is being run by my team is a couple of reasons. First of all, it was in my team in Department of Finance. It just happened to be our responsibility, and primarily because I guess I'm a subject matter expert for it, and so it sort of fell to me. And somewhat of an enthusiast, so it sort of fell to me. And so when we got machinery of government moved to Prime Minister and Cabinet, and because this is something that the Prime Minister has picked up himself, it came over to Prime Minister and Cabinet as part of those responsibilities and stayed in our team because we have the expertise for, I guess, the public consultation aspect, for the design of it. We have subject matter expertise about OGP itself and the relationships to at least kick the process off. How it's implemented once the National Action Plan is developed will be a different thing. Because, and there's a whole range of options, everything from that kind of formal task force made up of Gov non-Gov as a potential model, but even within government, it will need to be resourced, according to the commitments that are agreed, effectively. So there may be a range of agencies involved in the implementation of it. Coordination would probably still stay in Prime Minister and Cabinet, though.
How are you going to get? So when we talk about citizens agencies. How do you, I'm giving you a tendency, and no offense.
No, it's fine.
How are you going to get a broader audience?
Yeah.
How are we going to hit that broader audience?
All right. So the answer to that is, first of all, every country's first national action plan has tended to have very quick participation of, let's say, the usual suspects, the people who are already interested.
That's right.
And that's just how it is. And then they've tried to branch out, and they've got a little bit of input from outside of that community or those communities. And but then they've got more participation by the time they get to the second national action plan. That's the first thing. Second thing is we're actually pulling in extra resources. We've got an extra full-time person coming in specifically to do outreach. So as of January, there will be a lot more, okay, let's go and target industries, let's go and target specific community groups, let's go and actually try to get more of those voices participating. As it is right now, we have a lot of the sort of transparency organizations, civil societies that are interested in democracy involved. We have a few people from industries, from a few different parts of industry sectors involved, and a bunch of citizens and other governments and other jurisdictions involved as well. But the major outreach, really trying to get out, will probably kick off in January, when we've got a little bit more of a resource to actually commit to doing some of that work. So there's a plan to do it, but obviously of 24 million Australians, then it's very likely we'll get a huge proportion of them interested in this in the very first instance. But we want to build that up over time.
And people will see more with success as well.
Yeah.
Once the first plan is in place, that will be seen as something that will pique a range of interest. Then when things start getting delivered, that will pique an additional range of interest. So that will help. But I'd also say that it's not government's sole responsibility to motivate the rest of Australians on this. There is a big role, and we're already doing this through the Australian Open Government Partnership Network.
I agree
Yeah,
with you.
to
And
get
one of my
civil
comments,
services
one of my
to do that.
comments was that if we're going to do this, it's a responsibility and an ownership
It's
that's
a
quite
shared.
large.
Yeah.
So
And I think possibly, just to raise another potential action point, is if we actually want to raise awareness of the OGP and the actions that Australia is taking, perhaps there should be joint ownership of the responsibility to do that if it's an action in the plan, so that moving forward, it is actually seen as something where you build more engagement in civil society, That's better for civil society because they're more influential. It's good for government because government is getting more insight into what people want from people who otherwise basically have disengaged.
Craig and I have spoken to a lot of people around the country who have been interested in participating, but wanting to know what level of commitment's needed from them. Am I going to have to come to a thing in Canberra and rank 865 ideas from 1 to 865? The answer is no. If there's something that people are specifically interested in, submit a commitment, submit an idea, take part, however much you want to be involved. Obviously, the more you're involved, the more success you may have. You may submit an idea that someone else gets on board with and helps to champion and joins you. And it's, I'd advise people who have very specific focused areas of interest to just get involved and to throw it in there, throw it in the mix, take part to whatever level they can. But the more people that start doing that, the more momentum this gets on a civil society point of view, and the more government's got to work with from the other side. So.
I was still shocked.
Oh, sorry. One last question. Yep.
Okay, so who's driving this international? So I've never heard of this until
Sure.
today. So why, how did the international angle come into this, and why all of a sudden Australia sort of participated?
Actually, you're probably better at answering that. Yeah. So how's this being driven internationally?
Yeah. Well, and who's doing it internationally? So the brief history, potted history, is that 2011, 8 countries got together and said, you know what we need to do is probably, if we're going to raise the bar for open government internationally, then we should probably do something. So they got together and created the first tranche of countries, which was 8 countries, and created OGP. And the idea was that funding comes from each member country, which goes to a secretariat in OGP, which then creates the support network, the consistent approaches and standards, the independent reporting mechanisms, and all those kinds of things to actually try to raise the bar. I think the real question is why.
And
that's
what was the event?
Indeed.
What was the event that drove this?
It's not actually so much an event. Part of this is, and I mean, it's not just countries. There's actually a lot of support financially and in other ways from things like the World Bank, IMF, all those kinds of organizations. Asia Bank. The reason for that, and this is my interpretation, the reason for that is because what a lot of those entities and what a lot of the developed countries have also found is that the inconsistency in how we do governance internationally leads to a little more difficulty when it comes to investment, when it comes to aid, when it comes to how agreements between countries work, when it comes to a whole bunch of the transnational, relationships and such. When you can start to improve transparency, improve accountability, improve, then these things lead to more effective government, more efficient government, better return on investment, more of the money that's going into government being spent on government rather than possibly other things. Part of this is about actually trying to improve, international practice so that countries can actually operate together more effectively. Sorry?
Level playing.
A more level playing field, but also creating a better life for people in all of those countries. Because if you know that the person that you've elected actually and is the Minister for Transport is actually making sure they're doing transport and they're doing the best thing by that job, that's good, and that raises public confidence, public participation. It's good for democracy. There's a lot of different angles to this. But part of the reason it's been so successful in growing from 8 to 69 countries is because the countries that have been involved have got genuine benefits out of it. So it's been quite helpful.
The OGP itself is obviously very transparent in its funding, where it comes from, where it spends it on, not just on a government side, but on the civil society side. So the big organisations that are providing global funding for the civil society. So Shreya works for Open Government Partnership. Her position is funded in part by civil society organisations contributing internationally, and I think the Media Network is a good example of that. They give a lot of money because it goes a long way in a lot of countries. It's a good way of them participating in this and funding, providing funding to keep it running.
Yeah. Cool. Kieran?
So here's a practical question.
let's assume that we've got a project.
Oh, I can't imagine you having a bad project.
How is the decision process? Yeah, what is the decision process to get over the first hurdle before you even get to the?
So what's the first hurdle?
People put up all these different suggestions,
Yep.
and then somehow or other you're going to select some of those. How is that process going to happen? So how do
What's
we
going to go to cabinet?
lobbying for our particular project?
Yes.
So the question's kind of what actually is going to go to the government, and what's the prioritisation and what's the decision-making process. So what we've tried to do is to design a development process for this, which the reason that we've done it so transparently, the reason that we're introducing the opportunity for everyone that participates in the development of this, which includes people from society, industry, but it also does include people from government, both in a formal and an informal sense. There's plenty of public servants that have really good ideas for ways to improve open government that will not be participating formally, I'm sure, and we encourage that. But all of those ideas, stage 3, is where we will be identifying, okay, let's let people vote up the ideas that they think have the most priority, right? And that will help us identify the community priorities, which becomes one of the considerations for the government. Part of stage 3 is looking at what is the best implementation process. What does success look like? What does, who should actually implement this particular commitment, and what sort of costs would be around that. Just bear with me. All of those things are being considered. If you suggested that everybody in Australia should have click a button to do something, and the cost is going to be $1 billion and the benefit is going to be sort of this much, we're not going to place any judgment on that. We just give everything to the government for them to make a decision, but obviously that's going to be probably ranked a little bit lower than something which has a higher benefit with possibly a lower cost. It's not going to be all things that are zero cost or no cost, but it's about making the best case for something. So in terms of lobbying an idea, it's not about lobbying, it's actually about what the community as a whole think is a good idea. So
yeah, that's what I want to know. We're going to vote on them?
Yes, yes. Yep.
Who's going to vote?
Everyone.
Every individual, or is an organisation going to be able to vote
On their behalf?
For
Yeah.
their 1,000 people?
We've got about 3 months to figure out the voting process to make sure it's actually equitable and appropriate. But it's not just on the voting, though, just to be clear. This is the prioritisation aspect is to help government understand what the community priorities are. So have a look at the website, have a look at the process we've designed, but we think that what we've developed is something that very clearly defines what the community priorities are, and then gives that to government, and then they're going to need to assess that based on a whole range of things.
I mean, if you know the process, the evaluation process, even if it is a public one, then that helps you work out how you present it.
How you game it.
Yes.
I know. I understand.
Yeah, look, it's going to be a very, very public process. And I think some of the details are still being discussed because, in Brisbane, we're getting something to where people said, well, it might be better to do consensus rather than voting because popularity contests aren't necessarily the best way. And I think there is still room in the next 3 months to basically have some input into how those decisions are made as well.
Yep.
I think that the worst thing would actually be to not make suggestions, because it would end up, you'd end up with a small group basically deciding. But at the end of the day, obviously what people think are priorities in the community is one consideration. Whether something is practically deliverable is going to be another. How it impacts on certain portfolios or certain areas, whether it's actually a federal government responsibility or not, is obviously a big consideration in there. So there's going to be a number of different factors involved.
How measurable it is an important thing.
Yes.
Every year they do the independent review, and the independent review measures your achievement against your targets. So if your targets aren't easily measurable in the first place, it's going to be hard to review. There's going to be a certain level of pushing ourselves. I think throughout the documentation, they talk about stretch goals, and stretch goals are important to push ourselves a little bit further. Setting those is going to be a challenge over and above the actually deciding on the commitments. We can decide that that's something we want to pursue and that's something we're going to push, but there might be some refinement needed. And this is where engagement consultation comes in again to set how much of a goal we make with a view to, we've got 2 years, and there's another national action plan in 2018, and there's another one in 2020. How do we work through this in a sensible, logical fashion? And that'll be hard to play. Do we weigh two proposals that propose the same thing with different goals against each other? Do we combine them and work out a sensible goal from the two? We don't want to set ourselves down any particular path right now, but we don't want to be sort of so fluid and agile. We'll say, just wait till March, we'll work it out, you'll be fine.
So the other part of this is that national action plans, the requirement from OGP is that they have 5 to 15 commitments. So you want those commitments to be big enough to be ambitious, and to not be, we're really trying to discourage the idea that a commitment should be something that's already planned. It should be something new. It should be something that stretches us beyond where we are. It should be something ambitious beyond where we are today. I would recommend that everybody actually read a couple of the national action plans by other governments. Have a look at the French one, have a look at the US one. It's actually worth looking at the UK, because the first 8 countries, which includes UK, US, Mexico, Brazil, Indonesia, Philippines, and 1 or 2 others, because they're all in their 3rd national action plan now, it's actually worth going back and looking at their first one. Look at the first one, look at the second one, look at the third one, and see the evolution over time about what they've done, how they've done it, and how they've delivered that. Because you can also see the reports that show the review of the implementation of the first 2 national action plans, now that they're up to the 3rd one. And that gives, I think, some really good ideas for the sort of firm commitments that people are looking for. So a couple of the other examples, unfortunately, these are slightly dated ones too. The Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, that's been one of the sort of commitments that a few governments have picked up, as well as the International Aid Transparency Initiative, which are both international initiatives about reporting on resources, extractive industries, and aid funding in a consistent and transparent way to actually get better comparative assessment across governments. So have a look at some of those action plans. I think they're very helpful in identifying the sort of things that are big enough to be, ambitious, and go from there.
The independent reviews are well worth reading too, particularly in the UK. The independent review of their first plan is very, very good reading, and it will give some ideas. So if anybody does want to propose things about change the culture of public service, make sure you come up with measurable goals on how that can be done, because that's what we need, is we need measurable things in there.
Yeah.
And some things are difficult to measure, but there are ways usually to do it.
Yeah. We've already had a few people say improve procurement transparency, and we said, okay, that's cool, but how? What do you specifically propose? And that's created a little bit of discussion, a little bit of debate, which has been really helpful. Yeah.
How would you know that unless you work in the public service?
Sorry?
How would you know that unless you work in the public service? I know, but how will someone else know how it's being procured?
No,
Well, it's from their perspective, what
They're seeing
will
it from the outside.
transparency look like to them?
Oh,
exactly. It's not about how you would implement it. It's about what they're specifically looking for. Yeah. So, point taken. Any other questions? Sorry, yes? Hello?
The independent reporting, so it's already happened in a couple of cases. What does that look like in terms of who does it? Craig before mentioned teeth,
Sure.
so there aren't any, okay. But what happens when there's incongruence between what happens when there's incongruence between what the commitment was and what the independent report says?
Sure.
The so what factor at the end of this, what are we getting out of it?
So fundamentally, the only real, so the OGP reports very transparently on what's going on. So then what ends up happening is it ends up becoming a pressure thing more so than anything else. OGP does have the ability to evict a country as a member. It does have the opportunity to put a country into like a holding pattern, or it's got a few things it can do from just what your status is, how you represent it. They also, like I said, report publicly. So what usually ends up happening with a lot of countries is that those public reports, publicly available reports, the independent reports are publicly available, end up being used in domestic politics, shall we say, as a pressure point as well. So from an OGP perspective, and other countries end up placing pressure as well. There are certainly a number of countries involved in OGP who actively advocate other countries to raise their game. So that diplomatic pressure, as well as the domestic pressure, as well as your position and standing in OGP, they're all just pressures. You know, they can't fine you per se, but those pressures have proven to be quite useful. And the example I'll give is New Zealand. New Zealand's approach to developing the National Action Plan was to develop a discussion paper, distribute the discussion paper for comment. Unfortunately, didn't take a lot of those comments on board, and then just contributed the National Action Plan to OGP. OGP determined that it didn't meet the civil society consultation minimum standard and actually rejected it. And New Zealand had to go and redo it to actually finalise the National Action Plan and to be considered a valid OGP member, which they did. They did go and do that, and they did go and fix the National Action Plan, and they've been very engaged ever since. So, you know, there's soft powers, but they're quite effective.
So it's not a formal relationship with, say, the integrity watchdog bodies in each of these countries. It's more of that, there's this report, you can go use that to be an effective.
It varies.
Yeah.
It varies country by country. Some have independent watchdogs, others don't have any of that infrastructure set up.
Yeah.
And it's someone like Transparency International or someone like that undertakes independent review. So it is very much a country by country thing. So independent is in this case very, very, very independent. And so it's someone well outside of government. Like who it will be in Australia, there's not really been, I think, much thinking on that at this point. Though there are, you know, some organisations who would be equipped to do it, and there are some networks that are forming who might be in a position as well. So we'll see.
And they usually provide some resourcing to that as well. So you end up with a combination of some in-country independent, truly independent review, as well as the OGP review, so that you actually get, you know, a bit of balancing out there as well. So it's being reviewed also with an international eye, which I think is quite useful and important.
Yes. Sometimes other countries get involved to have a look.
I get a bit concerned about the availability of data being confused with access to information. And ComLaw is the perfect example. ComLaw has got every single thing you would like to know about acts that have been passed in Australia in a complete history. I prepare probably between 100 and 500 pages of legislation a month.
Yep.
The Office of the Government Solicitor insists on that being made available to them on A4 pieces of paper.
Yeah.
And will only accept them if there are A4 pieces of paper, so that they can replicate them in PDF format on the ComLaw website in a way that releases all of the information. But if I want to find a specific part of the Act and then reference that back to the Hansard, which gives the government intent to underline that change in the Act, that is a process that I can give to one of my staff because it's going to take a week.
Totally.
And the management of data within government departments varies to such a huge degree that it will be a real struggle, I believe, but I think it's worth doing. I mean, it's a long haul, clearly.
That goes back to your idea, right?
Takes them out.
Yeah.
So the simple, sorry, do I need to repeat? So the questions around management of government information and data internally and how that doesn't necessarily facilitate efficiency or transparency or accountability, even for that matter. And this comes back to the kind of the earlier point I was making. There is always more work to do in this space. There is always more work to do in open government in the broadest possible sense of how you can interpret open government. One of the areas that is really clear for Australia is that transformation from old processes to new processes to actually enable greater transparency, accountability, efficiency, all that kind of good stuff through making the stuff more programmatic. But again, that's me being a geek and thinking about those things. But it's important.
It's a very good idea.
Thank you very much. I think so. But the point is that, and it is because we already have a system. You know, we already have Hansard available, but it's not available particularly well programmatically. We already have a system where we have annual reports and we have budgets that are publicly available. We have our question time live streamed. There's a lot of things we have. The question is, what do we need to improve. And the gentleman earlier spoke about, some of the very relevant and questions around, in which direction FOI is going and what we need to do around that. And I think that's an important area for debate and for discussion. But it is certain that one of the areas that Australia could improve in is how we deal with the digital transformation of some of our processes to make our democracy more visible.
Just a comment based on experience, what you said about structuring in X amount of time legislation would not only make it easier to do what you're saying, which is being able to cross-reference, but in terms of when you get legislation that's very, very specific, and it's very technical, and the case I've experienced is legislation around clean energy and clean energy regulator, where and the national greenhouse energy thing, like if that document, that legislation had been written in XML document type, doing a lot of the supporting infrastructure to collect that data will be so much easier.
Absolutely.
And if there's one idea I think you're right on, that one is probably the most important.
Well, contributed to the forum. I'm going to not contribute anything yet.
And I think also something to think about is, yes, definitely get all these ideas into the process.
Yes.
Things that don't get into the plan, if they're not in the National Action Plan, that doesn't mean that they're not there. Government may actually still do work on things. I think part of this is an opportunity to get a lot of these ideas directly to Cabinet level. I think a lot of these ideas, if they're explained in a way that Cabinet understands their value, they might say, well, aren't we already doing that, or we should be doing that? And they will see those things, regardless of the National Action Plan, they'll still see them as things that need to happen. I think in a lot of cases, things don't always get the opportunity to get to that level in a format that's communicated that is clear. So it is this is a very good opportunity to suggest these ideas through.
Indeed.
Just a follow-up question from that. What happens next?
What happens next? So we are in stage.
That's from me.
There we go.
Very
Hey,
good
Tom.
question.
I couldn't get a word in edgeways, so
That's all right. We're picking them up online too.
What happens next is, so the entire consultation process is documented on the website. So please go and check out the website, familiarize yourself with the consultation process, with the stages, join the mailing list so that when things happen, you'll be notified. The live events that are happening in February and probably March or April for stage 2 and stage 3 respectively, people will be notified and they'll be able to participate both in person or online. We're trying to, again, make it as open as possible. But there's also a lot of organisations that are saying, you know what, we're going to go and do a consultation with our sphere, with our community, with the conference that we run anyway. Whatever, we're going to go and create our own little consultation, and we're going to contribute something as a mass, input, which is fabulous, which is wonderful, and we support that, and we're happy to come and participate in those things or speak to those things, or indeed to stay away if you don't want us, because there's a few people that don't like government very much, and that's completely fine. But we want to support all of those kinds of initiatives. So exactly what happens now is we're in stage 2. There's a wiki available where we've got some content up around, vision, background from stage 1 and the framework, but we've also got for stage 2 a page of starting to flush out some of those ideas. So just add ideas, add, any information about those ideas, contribute to other people's ideas, get into the discussion, start to debate things. We will be encouraging and supporting and, and promoting those active exchange of ideas from people and trying to get out the word as much as possible. And if you can all help us get the word out to other communities and to other spheres, that would be very, very helpful. And there's a lot of information there about how to actually contribute to the process. For some people who are very comfortable online, participating in a wiki or a blog or Twitter is quite comfortable. For people who are not comfortable doing that, they can, of course, send us something by email, send it by snail mail if you really, really have to, but only if you really have to, please. Send us, give us a call, have a conversation. Any offline sort of communications are obviously also encouraged, and we try to have a lot of those meetings and community sort of get-togethers with people to encourage that as well. We will, however, make sure that all contributions to this, regardless of where they come from, are put online for that peer review, because we want other people to be able to say, this is a good idea, this has already happened, maybe this isn't a good idea, you know, and get some of that active exchange of ideas and review around some of these ideas. So really it's just a good chance to get involved and help us out and help you out, you know.
In terms of what happens next, once we finalise the action plan, Cabinet says yes, the OGP says yes, great. We don't just sit down and wait for December 2017 to do all this again. We've sort of said that other countries have set up sort of collaborative networks between government, industry and civil society. Our hope is that that might be an outcome from this process, and that talks continually about the progress of the implementation of the National Action Plan. We've got our first year, we've got a target to get the independent review done, so that's got to happen. We've got to start working out what goes into the next National Action Plan. What do we do with the measures we didn't look at last time? What happens to them? Do they stay in discussion? Do we find a way of keeping those live? So it's not like we do this, then subside for 18 months and then come back up again and have to build all the groundwork. We're hoping that this keeps rolling and keeps on going.
And it's worth noting, this is the first time ever that there's been a formal mechanism to do something like this. Open government has always been, you know, people advocating and lobbying government to try and do things on all kinds of different topics. It's been government sort of saying yes or no. It's been a very sort of, you know, castle with a moat with people sort of trying to climb that moat kind of approach. This is the first time we have a genuine, and I really mean this, opportunity to set up something that is a collaborative approach, that is a whole, like a government and non-government approach to how we do these kinds of things in future. It is new, and I understand, I genuinely understand people's skepticism and frustration. I have been on that side of the fence. I was on that side of the fence for a long time before coming into government, but I strongly encourage you to see this as an opportunity and to try to run with it, because if we can make some progress in this and establish that formal mechanism for government and non-government co-development of a path forward, then that will be truly world-changing for everybody.
So final comments, just a couple minutes. Yep.
There was a 4-year lag in joining the other countries. Is there any commitment to actually catching up, or will be?
No. So basically, each country that joins, from the point they join, there is obviously additional pressure to sort of meet where those countries have got to, which is, you know, just how it is. But there's no catch-up per se. We develop our National Action Plan, we're held to our National Action Plan. And OGP are very, very clear about saying every country is at a different stage and that they support everyone moving forward from wherever they're at that point in time.
And frankly, Australia is ahead of a lot of the countries who've already been in it for quite a long time, in that we have far more developed infrastructure and systems and other things. So we're starting at a unique point for us. There are definitely things we can take away from other countries, but there are also things that they can learn from us, even from our starting plan. So I think it would be a very interesting journey. We're going to have to end the questions there. There'll be time to ask questions, but I'll just throw up a final slide just to show you some of the resources and things that are out there. So for more information about the OGP, opengovpartnership.org is where you'll find all that information. You'll find the 109 action plans, all of the commitments, a lot of information about the process and how they have also, you know, called out countries when they haven't been doing what they're supposed to do. The OGP Civil Society Hub is well worth visiting. It's got lots of resources for civil society advocates and activists on how to engage productively through the OGP process. And that's built on the experience of been doing it for often for 4 years or so. And it's also a great network of people talking about the different things that are happening in different countries on a civil service perspective related to open government. So it is a very, very good network and well worth looking. Here in Australia, the government side on this is OGP AU. So that's up, and that has all the information that links off to the wiki. The Australian OGP network is that group that I talked about of civil societies and individuals starting to organise to provide a little bit of a more networked approach. That's again for sharing information, for we're looking at potentially forming some working groups around specific topics where we believe there should be actions suggested into the plan to make sure they're actually defined in a way that actually makes them more eligible to actually go into the process. So they've got measurable goals and the outcomes are clear. On Twitter, OGPAU is the hashtag being used here, and they're very active internationally on the OGP tag and through OpenGov Art. And if you want to get to the wiki, it's open now. It's just up at that address, and it's all there and ready to be added to. You certainly can.
Can't write that fast.
Where are all the cameras?
It's not my hand on my phone. Is it possible to distribute that PowerPoint?
Of course. Yeah, it'll be coming.
Okay.
It's been improving slightly with each information session. So thank you to everyone for coming along tonight. I know it's the end of the day and it's near Christmas, so it is a difficult time to get people out. More questions, I can stick around for a little while. I don't know about Pia and Toby. It'll be all right for a little while. And of course, you can ask questions through email to Pia's team as well. And please talk to your friends about this. Again, if we want to get the word out, a lot of it's going to have to happen starting from the people who are actually interested and involved and actually see some value in it. And please contribute your ideas and more defined than ideas through the wiki on some of the actions you believe would actually have a lot of value for Australia and taking us forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.